What's up, guys? I'm Uncle Freedom, coming to you on a glorious and well-deserved day off. A quite cold day off, might I add. We're in the middle of whatever Old Man Winter's throwing at us, and like another 4 or 5 inches of snow and like 25 below zero. It's sure to be a good time. So it's time for another episode and the terminal effect. We've covered some things like 10mm, 9mm. We've covered 7mm 08, the venerable 30-06, and even 243 Winchester. But now it's time to get into one of the most American cartridges ever created, even more American than the 30-06, the 11.43 by 23mm, otherwise known as the 45 automatic, the 45 ACP, the Soul Snatcher, or just the Lord's caliber. 45 ACP, the original fat, slow round made for semi-automatic handguns, the 45. But first, to understand where, in fact, that we are, we gotta go back and look at kind of how we started, right? How did 45 ACP become an actual thing that we would have? Well, back in 1899, so way back in the Wayback Machine, the United States government was in the Philippines, and they were currently facing off against a group of people known as the Moro tribesmen. Now, the Moro warriors took exception to the occupying United States force, as most countries seem to do, and the U.S. men were currently issued out the Colt Model 1892 chambered in 38 long Colt. That is not 38 special. You'll find out why they're different in a different video, but they are very much so not the thing. So it's a stunning 150 grain projectile doing 750 feet per second at 201 foot-pounds of energy. Yes, that is 22 long rifle kind of energy. Now, I should say, as we go through these, and people have pointed this out, that we use things like foot-pounds of energy and velocity and bullet weights because getting foot-pounds of energy is a mathematical equation from the bullet weight and the velocity of the round. That's why we know things like if you double the weight, you double the potential energy. And if you double the speed, you square the velocity. Basically, it's 4 times. So we understand and know that because it's a mathematical formula. We use foot-pounds of energy as a direct comparison one to the other because it's very easy for me to explain to you that something with 500 foot-pounds of energy has better stopping capability and potential energy than something with 200. So that's why we use that. So most of the officers, going back to this conflict with the Moro tribes, most officers found themselves when they engaged with the Moro warriors, and it's an Edict 38 long Colt, well, they found themselves, though they didn't, they just ceased to exist anymore because a determined enemy with as it turns out, a wooden and grass shield could stop a 38 long Colt, and they just came in and wreaked havoc on a bunch of officers who were like, why isn't my stuff working? So now that we've done that, right, the War Department decided, man, stuff's got to change, right? This is insane. It doesn't work, right? Like, we know it doesn't work. So they decided something much must be done, and they launched what was known as the Thompson-LaGarde trials. Now, these are pretty grisly trials because we didn't have the stuff that we have now back in the like dawn of the new century in 1900. But even in their testing, as expected, the 38 long Colt failed miserably all the way across the board. It just didn't freaking work, right? And testing showed that what they were hunting for was something along the lines of 45 Colt ballistics, right? So the venerable 45 Colt, people that call this the 45 long Colt are wrong. This is not the long Colt. This is just known as the 45 Colt. Shown here, this is a 45 Colt. The round that they determined would work is this 225 grain semi-wad cutter at 14,000 psi chamber pressure, running 960 feet per second and rocking out 460 foot-pounds of energy. This old classic standby, the 45 Colt. So we decided we needed this. Now, here was the problem, though. At this time, semi-automatic and fully automatic stuff was progressing rapidly, and it was very apparent to all that that was, in fact, the future of warfare and arms. So we needed something different. Well, during this time, the great gun god himself, John Moses Browning, like my moment of silence there for that, and Colt were currently in development for something known as a 41 caliber semi-automatic round. That's right, John Moses Browning was already working on a 41 back in 1904, but the War Department decided that it had to be a 45 caliber projectile. They couldn't do a 41, it had to be a 45. So the Lord of War Arms quickly obliged him and developed the .45 caliber 1905 pistol. Now that 1905 pistol does not look like the 1911 you and I know and love, but it was, the DNA was definitely there. Colt and Browning continued refinement of this pistol and cartridge capability, and on March 29th of 1911, the model 1911 and the caliber .45 automatic ball cartridge were adopted. The specs on that original load that we would have for the .45 ball cartridge, what we were looking at here was 45 cal, a 451 diameter projectile that's 230 grains at 21,000 psi, so a very hot round for back in the day, moving at 830 feet per second, generating 351 foot-pounds of energy. And that is what we decided on. We went to this guy. So we went from something very akin, now this is a 38 special compared to a 45, but you can just, it's a big difference, right? It's chunky. So during the trials, like we talk a lot about the handgun trials for the Beretta, we talk about the handgun trials when we start talking about things like the SIG 320. Let's talk about the actual handgun trials and what really won people over for the .45 ACP, allowing it to be adopted by the government. So during the actual trials itself, it was insanely reliable. How reliable do I mean? 6,000 rounds without a malfunction. That's impressive for any gun. If we start talking about 6,000 rounds with no malfunctions in a 1911, that is special. The incredible popularity of this round, though, did cause some unforeseen issues. Now, keep in mind, when we developed this, we weren't at war with anybody. We had like skirmishes in places, but we weren't at a full-scale war footing. So we were just trying to find a better solution. The problem was World War I happened, and it happened all at once. And the demand for the 1911 quickly outran the supply numbers that we had for producing 1911s and issuing them to troops. So that led to Smith & Wesson and Colt developing what was known as a half-moon clip, right? I say quotes, but it's really a half-moon clip. What that half-moon clip did was it allowed them to use the .45 ACP cartridge in a revolver so that they could use the logistical supply lines that produced and carried the .45 ACP and get it to more troops, even though it was in a revolver. And that revolver that it came out in was the model 1917. That revolver stayed in service through World War II. So .45 ACP in a revolver, it's not new. They were doing it before World War I, okay? That's not new. Running moon clips and half moon clips is not a new thing. That's not a brand new thing that gamers invented. That is something that was created to solve a problem, to allow an ammo compatibility issue in a war footing, which is pretty cool. But rarely has a cartridge ever created as much mystique as the .45 ACP. It is literally the butt and the heel of like every FUDism known to man. I mean, things like, if you get shot with a .45, you stay shot. If it passes close, it'll just steal your soul right out of your body. Like, you can't make this shit up because it's real, and that's what people say. In case you're wondering, though, this is where that argument of must stop in power came from, the .45 ACP. That's literally something they were trying to develop back in the day, and that's where we get it from. And even today, you hear things like 9mm expands, but .45 don't shrink. You know, if people just read like ballistics data, you would realize why cartridge arguments about superior stop-in power is a myth. You would also learn that things like there is really like pistols are universally like bad at putting down threats. It's a function of terminal ballistics, man. It's a real thing. But the .45 ACP benefited pretty well from something, and it's one of the reasons the popularity is so wild still to this day. It is an insanely accurate, and it can be insanely accurate, and it is chambered in insanely accurate firearms. It is a very low pressure round by standard rounds. You know, keep in mind 35,000 psi is 9 mils territory, right? 45 is 21,000, right? Big, fat, slow round. That means it's insanely easy on guns. It doesn't beat guns up, and the parts life was just insane, which just adds to its legacy. That is one of the things that makes the .45 such a cool round as it is. There were some issues, though. So as we developed and we started working on things, the .45 ACP, this was the standard, man. This big, giant, fat round bullet. But the problem was, as we migrated and we started, as hollow points began to get created, we have a squared off portion at the front. And it caused extreme feeding issues in 1911. And the thing is, like, this is a just recently rectified problem, like, en masse. How real was the feeding issue, though? So Masad Ayub, the dawn of defensive encounters, man, like, this dude is a use of force expert. I don't agree with everything Masad Ayub does. I don't agree with everything he talks about shooting, but I cannot deny the fact that the man has been toting a gun professionally for a very, very long time. And there's a reason people hire him as an expert witness. Even Masad Ayub, back in his days, he carried a 1911. That was one of the guns he carried as he went down the trail of being a law enforcement officer. During his days, he carried one hollow point in the chamber, and the magazine was full of ball ammo because the hollow points would not reliably cycle, and it was just going to cause a malfunction. So he figured his first round out would be the best round he had, and then he would have ball ammo to keep cycling. So that's the thing, though. 1911 had problems cycling and feeding hollow point ammunition. It's not an issue anymore, right? So we've gotten all feed ramp geometry sorted out. So shooting things even like this is, yes, that is a legit black Talon right there. So that's a real black Talon 45 ACP. The new problem we have with 45, right, is in the world of the plastic, fantastic wonder gun, your average gun hobbyist, not people like me, not people probably like you, but your average gun hobbyist is very likely very illy equipped to keep an extremely tight tolerance hand-fitted gun running. That was always the crux with 1911, right? In order to make a 1911 run well in adverse conditions, you have to have looser tolerances so that little things don't gum up the action. And your average Joe Blow hobbyist gun owner does not have the capability to maintain those things at a level that keeps them running. It's just reality, right? You want to do more and want to learn more, do more, right? This is where I would put in a plug for like SDI or something. I'm just kidding. I'll never partner with SDI. But knowing things like 1911 stones and how to work and fit on your guns and do that stuff, that's a part of being that 1911 crowd. But the 45 ACP, if we really want to look at one of the places the 45 ACP is just awesome, right? The firearm list that is chambered for the 45 ACP is the who's who of the firearm world. From the timeless Tommy gun, which created the $200 tax stamp because that was the cost of them when the Gun Control Act was passed, to the 1911, which nobody will... 1911 is one of the most iconic, identifiable firearms on the planet. And even some guns that like only a mother could love, like the Liberator and the M3 grease gun. No, M3 grease guns are like low-key cool. I admit they're pretty cool. And you get more modern offerings out there, like the Chris Vector system. Glock has their 21. They have the short frame variant of that. So it's progressing, and it's still got stuff, and it still makes good guns for it. But man, the timeless guns that were created with the 45 ACP in mind are just some of the most classic firearms ever made. The 45 ACP itself is legitimately almost as American as baseball and apple pie. Maybe slightly more American than the Andy Griffith Show. And can we talk about it's also as American as terrible piss-flavored water that we like to call beer. I have never understood why, as a country, we hitched our boat to like Bud Light when Yuengling is made here. I'll say it. Bud Light's not real beer. It's just what we made, that terrible version, American lager. That stuff's awful, man. That's not real beer. But then again, that's a very American thing for us to do. 45 ACP is about that American as well. Then there's also something else, right? So 45 actually carries a plus P denotation, okay? So if you followed some of the other stuff, 40 doesn't have a plus P variant. 9mm does, right? 9mm 37.5, 38,000 PSI from 35. And the 45 goes to 23,000 PSI from 21,000 PSI. So we added velocity a little bit, and some of the lessons that are learned in ballistics, there's some really awesome 45 stuff out there. But there's also some really terrible stuff that's happened with the 45. Probably none more terrible. It was a cool idea, but in theory it was just bad. Is this guy. So this little short guy right here, that's the 45 gap. The 45 Glock automatic pistol or Glock action pistol. It's a 45, but the purpose behind this 45 was that they wanted to take a 45 diameter thing, which had a very long front to back grip ratio, and cram that down into a 9mm length so that they could stick a full house 45 load inside of a 9mm sized frame. That was kind of a big deal, right? It was a very smart idea. So the 45 gap operates at 23,000 PSI, just like a 45 plus P, and pretty much a standard, like, what we saw from that is we were really getting close to 45 ACP, and for a hand loader, I got small pistol primers versus large pistol primers, so that was kind of a big deal. So let's talk about some actual loadings, right? Like the real loads, like my top 5 for target. Actually, I only have 4 target loads because I don't stray too much, because the 4 work and they feed cycle reliably. Number 1 for me is the Federal 230 grain full metal jacket, 890 feet per second, 404 foot-pounds of energy. It's a solid round. It's a very accurate round. It does what it's supposed to do. Second for me is Spear Lawman, 230 grain, 830 feet per second, 352 foot-pounds of energy. Standard round, right? Winchester, 230 grain, 835 feet per second, 356 foot-pounds of energy. And then kind of a slept-on 45, it's insanely consistent, is the Fiocchi. The Fiocchi, like range dynamics, 230 grain, 860 feet per second, 378 foot-pounds of energy. It functions really freaking well. It's awesome. So what have we looked at? Service loads, right? So again, we denote this out as service loads, or things that you would use if, say, food chain problems or like gangbanger problems, right? Service caliber loads. First for me is going to surprise some people, because this is typically where Hornady lives on a lot of my list, but it doesn't for 45. My favorite, most consistent 45 hollow point round right now is the Federal HST. 230 grain, doing 890 feet per second, 405 foot-pounds of energy. You shoot Federal HSTs and you shoot Federal 230 grain ball, it is an identical shooting experience, right down to point of impact. It's awesome. It's a great thing. Number 2 on my service loads, it still isn't Hornady Critical Duty. It's actually the Underwood Extreme Defender. I adore that round, and I've yet to find a caliber or a firearm it doesn't work out of. So what we're going to get with the Extreme Defender is a solid copper fluted projectile, 135 grain. This is a plus P offering, so 23,000 PSI, 1,240 feet per second, 461 foot-pounds of energy. It is an exceptionally light recoiling round. It is kind of loud. I will tell you that. Number 3 is finally where Hornady arrives. I think this Hornady round is amazing, but I can say, shooting into gel and other stuff, the other 2 just work better and more consistently. Hornady Critical Duty, again, a plus P offering, 220 grain, flex lock hollow point, doing 975 feet per second for 464 foot-pounds of energy. That's right, that's got the most energy of any of them we've talked about so far, but it doesn't do it as well as those first 2. Number 3 for me is going to be, as actually against a list on a lot of stuff, but it's the Remington Golden Saber. So I like the Remington Golden Saber 45 ACP plus P. We are talking about a 185 grain projectile doing 1,140 feet per second, generating 534 foot-pounds of energy. Now, why do I like it in here and I don't like it in other ones? It seems to stay together better than the standard Golden Saber stuff does out of like 9mm. It doesn't lose its jacket as much in my testing. Number 5 is the Winchester Ranger T. I love the Ranger T, especially in bigger board stuff, 40-45. After all, the Ranger T is literally this bullet, but not black. So it is the black Talon. Basically what we're looking at, Ranger T, 230 grain jacketed hollow point, cruising out 885 feet per second, generating 400 foot-pounds of energy, and it's a showstopper. It works every time. And then finally, the last one I'll leave, it's a bonus one because it's really cool. Actually, you guys have seen it a couple of times, and it's this guy. This is the Underwood loading, 230 grain to plus P varieties, doing 1,000 feet per second, 511 foot-pounds of energy. I will tell you that is a snappy round. So what about dangerous game, right? Dangerous game is not really the place where 45 ACP excels because, again, it is slower than most other offerings. But there are a couple of viable options that track true and give the penetration we need for something dangerous game. Number one is going to be the Underwood loading hard cast 255 grain plus P doing 925 feet per second at 485 foot-pounds of energy. I'm going to tell you that gun recoils. Like, it is snappy when you shoot that. So if you have a comp on your 45, that's a really good option. Number two is the Buffalo Bore Outdoorsman and a plus P variant. It's no surprise that this is here. I talk about this round a lot because it's a fantastic, oh crap, big kitty, don't turn me into like crap round. So what we're looking for is a 255 grain projectile doing 925 feet per second at 485 foot-pounds of energy. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's got identical stats as the first two, and in shooting them in practice, they are within like 2 feet per second of each other. It's fantastic. Number three is an Underwood offering. This is an Underwood plus P, you knew it, the Extreme Penetrator, because that round just does that job exceptionally well. So what we're looking for here is a 200 grain projectile, 1,000 feet per second, 44 foot-pounds of energy. Money. I like it. I like it a lot. Those are my top three by far for dangerous game. So in case you were wondering though, for something like the 45 Gap, if that's kind of your game and you have like the only model of Glock that was ever made for it, I had one of those one time. Gold Dots makes those. Spear Gold Dots, 200 grain projectile, 970 feet per second, 418 foot-pounds of energy. So now you have an option in case you were wondering. So when we talk about 45, they all fall to ball. The classic, legendary 45 ACP. I carry 45 because they don't make 46. This round is amazing. Will I choose a 45 over my 9mm? No, I won't. But I think 45 has a place. And I always will. Does it snatch souls merely by passing you? No. It's a low pressure, relatively slow comparative round. But man, it's fun to shoot. And with the innovation we've seen in modern ballistic sciences, technologies, improvements in antimony for the lead, jacket profiles, better powder, we're going to see the 45 increase its capability in the coming years, not decrease and not fall out of favor. Because let's face it, one of the most infinitely shootable, best trigger options on the market is a 1911. And I believe 1911s are standard owning if you consider yourself a serious gun owner. And 45 is the way to do that, unless you're running a double stack. In that case, then like the new Kimber double, I think Kimber made that double stack. If you're old like me, you have a Para Ordnance LD 1445, the original double stack 45 ACP. There will always be something that is special about slinging 45 ball out of a tightly fit, beautifully finished 1911 that cannot be replicated no matter how awesome your plastic guns are. It just feels like America. So guys, the 45 ACP, America's cartridge, the Lord's caliber, 45 ACP. Because they all fall to ball, and I carry 45 because they don't make a 46. 2 world wars, Tommy guns, American crime, and a random revolver. 45 ACP, fantastically cool round with a ton of history. So guys, I am Uncle Freedom. Hopefully you found this informative. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and until next time, I'll see you later.